Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma. Welcome back to my studio. You might recall during last week's lessons that I started a new study board for graphite and watercolor birds. We finished this under drawing in graphite for the watercolor study. And so I'm going to begin laying in the foundational watercolor colors today. We also did this study of this little duck head, and so we are also going to lay in the foundational watercolors on him as well. Let's begin with this yellow bird, and as you can see, the duck is there on the right. I want to begin with the foundational color with this bright yellow, and as I lay in a wash, I'm using cadmium yellow and varying the dark and lightness of it with the water ranges. So I want to be careful to leave some glimmers of the paper white where the lightest highlights are evident. So there where I'm painting now, the right side of him, the light is hitting very strong. So I want to be sure to let some of the paper remain white where the sunlight will be the strongest, and we want to give some evidence of highlights. I'm adding a little bit of brown in the underbelly, and I want to be sure to add a wash of yellow over the feet. They are an unusual color, but there is a little bit of edge of yellow on them as well. Now that I have the underwash, I'm going to go in with a little bit of a light brown that is a burnt sienna. It's a little bit of a reddish brown into under his neck, but also into the tree branch. The light is coming from the top left, and so the right side of the branch is going to be in shadow. And so I'm going to gradually deepen that shadow after I do the underwash of the browns. In order to give the 3D illusion of him on the branch, right under his belly against that left side of the branch, the right side of the branch, I want to have a strong shadow, and I'm adding a little bit of violet into the brown to accentuate the shadows. I like to use flat brushes when I do textured surfaces because I can get little lines as well as flat washes. So I want to create some of the texture of the bark with the varying colors, but also with a nice flat edge that can create some lines and strong strokes. I'm switching brushes now, and I'm going to use a more detailed brush to begin developing some of the deep brown and black patterns and the eye area where there is a strong area of black hairs and feather designs. And that will be the focal point of this little painting, will be that eye and beak and curve of the neck. And so I want to really focus on the detail, but also being careful to have the strokes of this little brush reveal the patterns that are unique to the feathers, the alignment of the hairs, and just to add enough detail to offer the suggested patterns that are created in this gorgeous bird. So I'm going to start with the head. I'm going to work down to that curve of the neck and then right into the strong, dark shapes that lead us to those feathers and the wing. The tips of that wing have a very contrasted pattern with white patches and black spots. So that will help to define the detail and the layers of this wing. I also want to be careful to leave the soft hairs that are evident on the neck against that wing, and then kind of create a soft tail and feathery marks throughout him instead of making too harsh of lines. At different points, I move to different areas of the painting because it needs a moment to dry and for the water to sink in and blend with the underlying colors. So that's why I move around sometimes. So I might work on the branch, I might go to the head, and then I might go to the wing and then the feet. It's because sometimes with watercolor, if it gets too wet, it will just all bleed together. So you need a moment to allow the color to seep into the paper, to do what it's going to do as far as blending with the underlying colors, and then you can come back with the next layer. Some watercolor artists love to work with a graphite pencil drawing, and that is my favorite for these small studies. Some watercolor artists prefer just an outline of their subject and then use color only and the brush strokes to do all of the defining of the specifics and the details. I like a variety, so here I want to develop some of the shapes and forming of these feathery hairs and marks and patterns that are unique to this type of bird. So I'm just kind of creating my own technique, but there's a lot of ways that you could use your watercolor approach. So find what works for you. I'm going a little bit strong with that black, so I'm going to pick up some of that in a moment. All you need to do is to water it down a little bit and then pick some up and to work it into the undercolor. But it helps with that curve of the neck to have that blend right in. I'm going to go back to my flat brush, work on spreading some of the strong strokes that I've developed on the branch and add a little bit of a lighter brown for that left side. Let's fill in the background. I'm just going to lay in a soft bluish violet to work with that nice yellow wash. And then just to do some final touch-ups with these spots and patterns on his feathers. Let's go on ahead and work with the duck now while the other bird dries a bit, and then we'll come back to it. The first stages that I want to do with this duck is to focus on laying in a shadowed blue tone in all of the areas where the light isn't hitting as strong, and to kind of lay in a wash that will work beautifully with the reddish brown that he will eventually be. So I work in the shadowed areas and build a little bit of form with the placement of them. I want to be careful with this yellow because if it mixes with blue, it's going to turn a little green. So I don't want to rush the yellow. So I'm going to let that dry and now go with a little bit of reddish brown over those shadowed areas and lay in a little bit of tone to create the overall base color for him. I don't want to scrub out that yellow, but I want to take in some of this reddish brown gradually as the underpainting is drying, and to kind of work in a little bolder reddish brown into the beak and into his feathery surface. I want to maintain the placement of those hairs, the direction that those hairs are laying, and emphasize them so that he has a definite, soft, smooth pattern. I'm going to switch out my brush now to a smaller brush and work on some of the details and to define him a little bit better. This eye is very important. I want it to be the focal point, but I want it to be accurate as well, and it does have this beautiful brown undertone as well as a black pupil. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit and come back to it as I work on the detail of his beak, the base of the beak, and some of the reflections going on, and the shadows, and some of the hair marks that are really important to establish that turn of the neck. And I think we will let him dry and come back to him later. So here we are. We have the foundational studies of these two birds, this beautiful yellow bird and this duck head. Join me in a couple of days where we will do some details on both of these birds and then continue some small studies of objects on this study page. Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing and Painting with Grandma.